Hello, Misfits. This is Kate.
And this is Kevin.
Welcome to Horrorwood. You look like you were about to scream there for a second.
Could you imagine? I just let out the most.
You're just like, I can't take it anymore. Yikes. We are back with part 2 of Gary DeVore.
Part 2 of the hot cowboy with a fucked up finger.
Well, that's one way to describe him. Before we get into it, did you hear the news? Probably, because I'm pretty sure we talked about it last week. We're nominated for an Ambie Award. Best Indie Podcast Host. We're so excited. So again, if you're a member of the Podcast Academy, be sure to give our category a listen. And if you like what you hear, throw a vote our way. We would really appreciate it.
Hey, and we're going to go to the ceremony that's here in Chicago at McCormick
I'm
Place.
so excited. More great news. The steamer on the espresso machine is working again.
It's fixed. What? Tell me the story of how it was fixed.
I took the little milk thingy off, gave it an extra good rinse, even though it was already clean, but maybe something was stuck, and I put it back on, and it worked.
Fresh steam.
Thank you, everyone, for your concern.
I've been thinking about it.
Thank you.
When was the last time you had a latte?
Well, it's been fixed for a few days now, so yesterday.
Okay.
I'm back on my cinnamon toast lattes.
Got you.
So
I just
everything's
wanted to
good.
double check.
All right, so let's get into this case. Kevin, I told you that part 2 was 22 pages when we spoke yesterday.
Correct.
I might have woken up at 4 a.m. this morning just because, and I wrote 8 more pages.
Oh my God.
I had lunch at 8:15 this morning.
Oh my God.
I didn't mean to, I wasn't trying to get up that early, but I just woke up and I was like, I can keep writing. So I'm about to give y'all a lot of information here. Close that out.
You were like, I'm about to give you a lot of information. Then your eyes went to your computer and you were like, what?
I got a weird notification. It was just like, you haven't backed anything up in 1,428 days.
Oh, no.
Anyway, to give you a reminder of what we learned last week, we started part 1 with the fact that screenwriter Gary DeVore vanished shortly after a phone conversation with his new wife, Wendy. He had previously been married to actresses Sandy Newton and Claudia Christian, as well as singer Maria Cole, widow of Nat King Cole. And remember, he received a notice from the IRS saying he owed hundreds of thousands of dollars pertaining to the sale of Nat King Cole's estate. Mm-hmm. He ended up filing for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, which is, I think, how he was able to clear that debt.
Got you.
It was around that time that he began experiencing writer's block and would go on these long drives to clear his head. We talked about that last week. And that was according to Claudia Christian, his wife, his third ex-wife.
The one from the yacht?
Yes, the one from the yacht.
Where they were just all messed up.
They were like, let's just get married, I guess. When he first began dating his fourth wife, Wendy, one of the first dates he took her on was to meet legendary game show producer and possibly, but probably not, assassin for the CIA, Chuck Barris. Gary and Wendy wed in 1996, and around that same time, he began working on a screenplay for a remake of the film The Big Steal, this one being set during the U.S. invasion of Panama. To help with his research, Gary turned to his longtime friend, cousin of actor Tommy Lee Jones, Chase Brandon. Chase Brandon had been an undercover CIA operative for 25 years, during which time he did a lot of work in Panama. But in 1996, he became the liaison to the entertainment industry to help productions accurately portray the CIA in their TV shows and films. And while it might sound a little scandaloso to have the CIA influencing what we watch on the screen, they were actually the last government agency to create a formal relationship with Hollywood.
Wow, that's interesting. Also, I love you said scandaloso, and I was just thinking from Wicked when she's like scandalocious.
So I have found myself saying wicked words. Like, don't confusify me. And I don't know why. It's not like I ever did that before, or even immediately after seeing that movie. It just sort of like started happening.
To creep in.
My youngest niece was like, why do they have to make up words?
Are your nieces still in Girl Scouts?
Not anymore.
I'm on the mailing list for the Girl Scouts of Kentuckiana.
Oh, uh-huh.
And I keep getting cookie things. So I was like, should I still buy them from that troop?
I mean, let me just double check. But I know that my oldest is not. I don't know if my youngest niece is. I don't think she is.
Right. Well, if not, I might switch it over to the Chicago girls.
Okay, sure. That makes sense.
I saw a TikTok video. Sorry to interrupt. I saw a TikTok video of like this woman getting out of a car, and all you hear her say is like, I've been searching for you fucking bitches for a long time. And then like all of a sudden, like it cuts to like a Girl Scout cookie table, and she's like, hi, can I have 3 boxes of...
Amazing. The FBI was well ahead of the game, setting up a liaison office in the 1930s.
Wow.
I'm not going to go too deep into the government's involvement in the entertainment industry in this story, aside from what's necessary to this case, because it warrants its own episode. There's a lot to it. There's a book I used for my research on this by Tricia Jenkins titled The CIA in Hollywood, How the Agency Shapes Film and Television. And Tricia Jenkins also gave an interview to that podcast that did the 8-part series on this case that I mentioned last week, Witnessed Fade to Black. I would love to get her on whenever we cover the government's involvement in the industry, because it's pretty wild and it goes pretty deep.
I imagine you writing a book like Government in Hollywood, and like on the back of the cover, you have like you're wearing a suit and your hair is like gelled back and you're like smiling at the... Not even smiling.
I was going to say, I don't feel like I would smile. Yeah, the stare.
I love it. I think we should make it happen.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Put it on the list. Prior to the CIA cozying up to Hollywood, the agency had generally refused to work with the entertainment industry, but that all changed in the 90s. And there are 2 big reasons why. Number 1, the CIA was established in 1947 to help the U.S. fight the Cold War. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, marking the end of the Cold War, the public and Congress, who felt the CIA had grown too secretive, began questioning whether there was even a need for the agency anymore. Reason number 2, the Aldrich Ames case. Aldrich Ames, I'm just going to assume I'm saying that right, was a CIA officer who became the head of Soviet counterintelligence. In 1985, he found himself drowning in personal debt to the tune of about $150,000.
Yeah.
To pay it off, he told the KGB, hey, I'll give you the names of 3 Russian double agents if you give me $50,000 for each name. And the KGB was like, totes, let's do it. With that, his debt was paid off. But Ames liked how easy it was to make a large sum of money, so he continued selling names to the KGB until he'd given up pretty much every Russian asset working for the CIA, pocketing more than $4.5 million. The people he gave up were forced back to Moscow, where they were either killed or imprisoned.
Oh, that's not nice.
The CIA knew they had a mole, they just didn't know who it was, so the agency joined forces with the FBI, launching an investigation that lasted 8 years. In 1994, the jig was up. Ames was caught and arrested and sentenced to life in prison without parole. The fact that the CIA hadn't been able to prevent Ames' betrayal didn't make the agency look great to the public. And it didn't help matters when Ames said that the CIA was, quote, a self-serving sham carried out by careerist bureaucrats who have managed to deceive several generations of American policymakers and the public about both the necessity and the value of their work.
Well, damn.
And he didn't stop there. He went on to say that there is, quote, no rational need for thousands of case officers and tens of thousands of agents working around the world, as the information our vast network acquires is generally insignificant or irrelevant to our policymakers' needs. Now, the Senate and Congress were seriously considering if the CIA was even needed anymore. And the CIA said, yes, you need us, we can show you. So to bolster their image and as a means of gaining the public's support, they turned to Hollywood to develop a TV series called The Classified Files of the CIA.
Never heard of it.
Little on the nose, but not as on the nose as the TV show that had inspired it, a series for the FBI titled The FBI.
Everyone's so creative.
The marketing team was on it.
They knew it. They were like,
FBI.
FBI!
However, due to a leadership change within the CIA, the TV series never went to air. Enter Chase Brandon. Brandon got the job as Hollywood liaison officer because of his connections through his famous cousin, obviously. Who better to interact with writers and directors and producers than someone who's already been doing that for years? In 2001, Chase Brandon told the New York Times that when given the opportunity to serve as Hollywood's go-to guy for all things CIA, he jumped at the chance because he was tired of employees of the agency being depicted as, quote, backstabbing assassins full of deceit and treachery. He said, quote, year after year, as moviegoers and TV watchers, we've seen our image and our reputation constantly sullied with egregious, ugly misrepresentations of who we are and what we stand for.
Ugh.
We've been imbued with these extraordinary Machiavellian conspiratorial capabilities.
End quote. I just imagined like Taylor Swift reputation, like bong, 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 FBI.
That should be their theme song to the TV show.
First I was a robber.
Oh. So the purpose of the CIA in Hollywood, which is basically the same of the FBI in Hollywood, the Pentagon in Hollywood, insert name of government agency here in Hollywood, is to be portrayed in a positive light. Bonus points if that portrayal sparks increased public interest, resulting in more recruits for given agency. A perfect example of this is the Pentagon's role in the 1986 and 2022 versions of the film Top Gun, starring Tom Cruise and his coconut
cakes.
We were talking about that. Was that last week's episode?
Yeah, and I don't remember why it came up.
I don't either. And I was going to get one until I found out it's $130.
Gold Belly is insane.
Well, it's the shipping.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's a bakery in Alabama that makes a strawberry cake that looks like it's to die for, Kate.
Ooh.
Bethany Frankel was talking about it all over TikTok.
Oh, my.
And eating it, and it looks so good.
I do like strawberry cake.
It's like, it's like a beautiful icing with like actual like strawberry in it, and a jam.
A
cream,
jam. Yum.
a bright pink cake.
These all sound like amazing things.
I'll send you a video.
Okay, great.
And we can just dream about it.
Excellent.
Or just buy a Duncan Hines.
A Duncan Hines. What?
Like a cake mix.
Oh, okay. Wow.
What?
I think it's because I got up at 4 a.m., but I was like, what's Duncan Hines?
Duncan Kate?
I know. Problems.
No.
Coming back.
Okay.
In a you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours kind of way, the Pentagon provided financial support, military aircraft, and counsel in exchange for script approval of Top Gun, along with other movies, but I'm just focusing on Top Gun right now. If they didn't like something about the script, they could say, take that out or we won't back your movie. The CIA took particular interest in Top Gun, stating it was, quote, the best recruiting tool the Navy, and specifically naval aviation, ever had, as applications and recruits skyrocketed after the film's release.
Oh.
This is why it always amuses me when people criticize Hollywood for talking about politics or make comments that politics don't belong in entertainment, because politics have literally helped shape the entertainment industry for decades. So let's get back to Gary. In 1996-1997, he enlisted Brandon's help to assist in research for The Big Steal. During the same time, Chase Brandon was writing the script for The Recruit, which starred Al Pacino and actually didn't come out until several years later in 2003. That's right, Brandon wrote the script for The Recruit. I didn't misspeak, I didn't mean Gary. Chase Brandon, this CIA guy,
He wrote the script.
wrote the script for The Recruit. You will not see his name in the writing credits, but he wrote the film's entire treatment, as well as numerous scenes, character descriptions, notes on sets and costumes, even suggestions regarding cinematography and editing. It's impossible to know how involved Brandon was in Gary's script for The Big Steal, but he was definitely around.
He's around.
And in regular communication with Gary.
And this guy doesn't really have any entertainment experience, right?
Well, aside from being Tommy Lee Jones's cousin.
Well, aside from being the cousin, like actually like working on films.
As the liaison, he's an advisor on a lot of movies.
He's an advisor. Okay, sorry. So he's seen
a consultant.
He's seen how it works.
And he knows a lot of people in Hollywood.
Great. So okay, that doesn't surprise me as much then.
When Wendy first moved in with Gary, he told her, hey, sometimes the phone will ring and when you answer, it'll be someone saying they're from the CIA or the New York Times. Just tell them I'm not here. Don't worry about it. Imagine your partner saying to you, hey, BT dubs, if the CIA calls, I'm not here. I'm going to say that's a red flag. I'm going to have follow-up questions. But Wendy seemed to go with it. Gary explained he had to reach out to various people for his writing sometimes, and it was no big deal.
Red flag. Red flag.
And according to Wendy, he often had calls with Chuck Barris. And whenever he did, he needed total privacy. She doesn't think much of this either because it's perfectly normal for someone to want privacy when they're talking on the phone. And during this time, Gary's mom passed away from cancer.
No.
And he'd been really close to her.
Oh.
But aside from that, overall, the majority of Gary's friends said he seemed happy and in good spirits in the weeks leading up to his disappearance.
That rhymed.
Did it?
Read that previous sentence.
The majority of Gary's friends said he seemed happy and in good spirits in the weeks leading up to his disappearance. Okay, it kind of did. It kind of did.
Kate's over here writing poetry.
4 a.m., baby! He was especially excited that he was going to get to direct The Big Steal. If you remember from part 1, he'd been wanting to direct for a long time. This was going to be his directorial debut. Mm-hmm. He turned in a 25-page treatment for the film. A treatment's basically an outline or a blueprint of the film, as well as a 49-page draft. Many of his friends say that he was always talking about this film and how it was going to, quote, blow the lid off the CIA. But just as he had in the past, Gary began experiencing a case of severe writer's block. And what does he do when he has severe writer's block?
Long drives.
He goes on long drives. So in the summer of 1997, he packed up his brand new white 1997 Eddie Bauer edition Ford Explorer, which apparently was a highly coveted vehicle at the time. It had all the bells and whistles. He brought along his laptop, of course, thousands of dollars worth of camera equipment. He loved photography, loved taking pictures along his travels. Running gear, 2 boxes of horse riding equipment. Remember, he loved riding horses because he's a cowboy.
Cowboy, baby.
And a handgun that he always brought along on these kind of trips for protection.
Sure.
Protection from what? I don't know.
The Wild West.
The Wild, Wild West. Despite most of Gary's friends saying he seemed content prior to leaving on this trip, his second ex-wife, Sandy Newton, feels differently. They had kept in touch over the years, and shortly before his trip, the two had lunch together. She sensed something was off with him during that lunch. She told the LA Times, quote, he sometimes represents himself as being okay. He's a dramatist. He may have said to other people, I'm fabulous, I'm great, but he had a long history of doubting himself. So according to her, he was good at putting his game face on, while inside he was maybe going through it. His friend David Thompson said that Gary was no stranger to depression. Whenever he got writer's block, he was really hard on himself because he felt like, this is the thing I do best and I can't do it anymore, like what's wrong with me? And he would just beat himself up over it. But he hoped a trip to Santa Fe would offer some clarity.
Like in Rent.
Is that where they go?
Yes, Santa Fe.
Oh.
There's that song, I think.
I don't remember that one.
Santa Fe would be nice, I think. I could be wrong.
You're probably right. I just don't remember that one. He knew some friends in Santa Fe, and it was a favorite place of his to go when he was having writer's block.
Okay.
A week before he left, he had lunch with his close friend, director John Irvin. John Irvin is a British director who garnered acclaim with a limited series he directed in 1979 called Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, most people have heard of that one. I mean, he's done a ton of stuff, but that's about the Cold War and a Russian spy who has infiltrated MI6. and he directed a couple of movies Gary had written. During this lunch, John said Gary wasn't himself, saying, quote, he was troubled. Something was bothering him. He wasn't really in the conversation. He was having trouble with the script he was writing, which he talked more about not the script, but about a government, very sensitive, inconvenient truth. John said he was speaking more as a journalist than he was as a screenwriter.
That's a movie, too, An Inconvenient Truth.
It is Al Gore. The environment.
Oh, that's correct. Yes.
Yes.
Terrifying.
On Monday, June 23rd, 1997, Gary said his goodbyes to Wendy and set out on the almost 1,000-mile drive, roughly 14 hours if you're driving straight through, to Santa Fe, New Mexico. His friend, Oscar-nominated actress Marsha Mason, owned a ranch there. Do you know who she is?
No.
Oh, you nodded your
I
head
nodded like
oh,
I did.
yeah,
I was going to
Marsha.
pretend. I love Marsha Mason, and I've always loved her. What is she in?
So Marsha Mason, she's been nominated for 4 Best Actress in a Leading Role Oscars.
Jesus Christ.
One being for The Goodbye Girl, which is probably what she's best known for, but her resume is long. During this time period, 1997, Marsha was guest starring on the sitcom Frasier as Sherry Dempsey, a girlfriend to Martin Crane, John Mahoney's character. She was nominated for an Emmy for that role. If you look at her IMDb, you'll be like, oh yeah,
I'll
I've seen
recognize
her and stuff.
her. Yeah, because
absolutely.
I've watched a lot of reruns of Frasier.
You will absolutely recognize, because she's been in a ton. I just thought that was interesting because that's all going on in her life while this mystery about Gary is swirling.
That's crazy.
Santa Fe was just what Gary needed. In a phone call with Wendy, he told her he'd broken the back of the script, which she took to mean that he had had a breakthrough and was able to finish his draft. The night before he was set to head home to California, he went to his friend Adrian, or 80, Gordon's for dinner. Like many of Gary's friendships with the opposite sex, he and 80 had once dated.
I mean, we know what happened. 80
had known Gary since she was 15, and they'd grown up together.
They're the same age, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Oh, gotcha.
They'd been close all their lives. Yeah, they didn't
Sorry,
date when he was like
she was
40
15.
and she was 15. No. They grew up together, I think a year apart, maybe.
Scare me like that.
He showed up to her house for dinner at 6:20 p.m. that night. And when she recalled the night, 80 said, quote, when I opened the door and he was standing there, he was so happy to see me. He had the biggest smile. I always loved his face. He had a huge grin. And to be clear, they didn't have like a fling that night. Like they really were just friends.
Because he's married.
He's married. And from everything I've read, he was not a cheater.
Okay.
And she even said, like, we never did anything when he was married. Like they dated
But when
in
he
the past.
wasn't married.
Well, then maybe they had some fun.
Hey.
But 80 added that Gary was a complicated man. She told the LA Times, quote, Gary had a very secretive side to him. I think he was many different people. I think he was very compartmentalized. Part of him was a redneck who liked to drink with cowboys and be with his horse. Part of him was a total womanizer. Gary also had a bad temper, but he was always sweet and lovely with me. He had rough times and depression. And remember when he yelled at Claudia Christian when she was trying to get a little something going?
And then they got divorced because of it.
Yeah.
Well, there was more.
There was more to it, but yeah. So he does have that side to him. And I feel like we're getting a picture of a guy who is maybe a different man to different people. To some, he's a sweetheart, a teddy bear, your best friend. To others, he's got this attitude of being hard on himself. He's depressed. He's quick to anger. And then there's the Gary, Kevin's Gary, with the twang in his voice, the rugged cowboy who can get any woman he wants, and Kevin too, if he so chooses.
I'm here. I'm open. Cowboys listening? You have my Instagram.
I did not think that was your type.
Slide into the D. I like all kinds of men.
Oh, okay. You don't discriminate.
I don't discriminate.
Honestly, Gary sounds like most people. Humans are multifaceted, and a lot of creative types experience self-doubt and bouts of depression, and even people who are not in the creative industry. Mm-hmm. But it's just worth mentioning those things so you have a clear picture of him. Mm-hmm. And it's worth noting that Gary was on prescription antidepressants. He took Wellbutrin.
Me too.
Hey, this is not a commercial for Wellbutrin. We're just saying.
I mean, hey, it's nice.
While at 80s, Gary talked a lot about the big steal, and she said something was off with him. So it's a common thing that we keep coming
Something's
across.
off.
She said he seemed completely absorbed by this film and also a little scared. And he happened to mention that he had a gun in his truck, which she took that to mean that Gary believed he was unsafe or just might need protection from someone. This is a little weird.
He thinks he might be in danger of something. Do we know if he'd taken the gun with him before on the trip?
I think so.
Probably so.
Yeah, it seems like maybe
thing
it's
that
something
he
he
would do.
did on long drives.
But mentioning it, maybe not so much.
Yeah. She just felt like there was something going on with him. But even with her, he was secretive and didn't show much vulnerability, so she wasn't really sure what was up. While at 80s that night, around 8 p.m., Gary did ecstasy, which is just interesting to note considering he would be getting on the road in just a little over 12 hours for a nearly 1,000-mile drive home. He might have smoked a little pot that night as well. He'd brought a bag with him on the trip that he kept in his glove compartment, and he did smoke. And at 10 o'clock that evening, he left 80's and went back to Marcia's, heading straight to bed. 80 told that podcast, Fade to Black, that as he was leaving, he said something to the effect of, "This is the last time you'll see me."
Weird.
This podcast came out in 2023, so she's giving this interview 26 years after that encounter.
That's a long time.
It's possible she's misremembering his last words to her, or maybe the circumstances surrounding his disappearance have caused her to think that that's what he said when it actually wasn't. Or maybe he did say that. We don't know for sure, but it's definitely weird. The next morning, Friday the 27th, Gary called Wendy and told her he was ready to deliver the script to the studio. He was feeling really good. He stayed for lunch before getting on the road, and Marcia asked him if he could drop her niece off at the Albuquerque airport on his way out of town, which he did. On the drive back, he called Wendy several times along the way. They were always in touch. The next day, they were going to host a bunch of their friends at their home to watch the Mike Tyson-Evander Holyfield fight. It was a highly anticipated fight. Gary had rented it on pay-per-view, and they were going to have a big party, so they were really looking forward to that. And this would end up being the fight where Tyson bit off a chunk of Holyfield's ear.
Ew.
Do you remember that?
I do.
Yeah. At 6 p.m. Friday evening, Gary stopped in Flagstaff, Arizona to get gas. And he is seen on the security camera wearing a plaid shirt and a cowboy hat, his usual ensemble. Kevin is smiling. And he can be seen walking through the aisles inside the gas station, then at the counter as he's paying for the gas. And that's the last image of Gary DeVore alive.
Shite.
According to his credit card records, he stopped for gas again at 10:10 p.m. in Finner, California. At 12:38 a.m., he called Wendy and told her he was stopping at a Denny's for a cup of coffee in the Mojave Desert. And he said he'd call her again when he was back on the road, which should have been just a few minutes.
I love Denny's. I haven't been to one in a while. Is there one near in Chicago?
I think so. I don't think I've been to a Denny's since high school.
Yeah, I think the same.
I feel like we used to go there after shows and stuff. Or like after rehearsals.
I love Denny's.
The waitress at Denny's remembered Gary. He ordered a cup of coffee, black, which is how he always drank it, and he had his script with him and talked to her about it. He's just talking about this script to every person that he meets.
It sounds to me like he's very insecure and nervous about this whole thing.
I don't know that insecure is a word I would use to describe him.
It's weird because if you're, it seems like it's consuming him.
I think it's definitely consuming him.
Do you think he's nervous about directing since this is his first directorial thing?
I don't think so. I think if he's nervous about anything, it's about possibly what he's found out in his research.
Okay, so it's not necessarily like the project itself. It's more along the lines of what he stumbled into with this whole CIA stuff.
Possibly, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know why he would bring his script into the restaurant unless he thought maybe he'd get a little work done. Like maybe he would just kind of go over it or something. I could see that. It's just interesting. Or maybe he just didn't want to leave it in the car in case
Fair enough.
Someone,
Someone
broke into the car or something.
Right.
Oddly, the security camera from the Denny's parking lot wasn't working the night Gary stopped in. It had been working fine up until that day, which is just a weird little thing.
Weird.
Meanwhile, Wendy's at home waiting for his call. So she waits and waits. And a while passes and Gary still hasn't called. She's getting a little annoyed at this point because she wants to go to sleep. It's the middle of the night. So she figures, well, I'll just call him. She calls his cell, no answer. She calls a second time, no answer. She calls a third time, still no answer. Just as she's getting concerned, the phone rings.
Oh.
It was Gary.
Gary.
According to Wendy, this call took place around 1:15 a.m. based on where she was in a movie she was watching. And he says, was that you calling? And she said, well, who else would it be at 1 o'clock in the morning? He doesn't respond. She says, Gary, are you okay? And he says, I'm pumping pure adrenaline here. She says, Gary? And he says, gotta go. And the call ends. And that's the last time Wendy ever spoke to him. She said that phone call was weird for several reasons. The way he answered, for one, saying, was that you calling? Like, obviously it was her. When he said, I'm pumping pure adrenaline here, she said that was a weird phrase. It wasn't the way that he talked. A lot of speculation is placed on that particular phrase in this case. I'm pumping pure adrenaline here. It just doesn't seem weird to me. He's been driving for hours, just had a cup of coffee. She asks if he's okay. To me, it's like he's saying, yeah, I'm great. I'm caffeinated. I'm pumping pure adrenaline here. But who knows? I don't know. I wasn't there.
Until you just said that, I thought it was weird. But now it makes sense to me a little bit.
It comes up a lot in this case. Wendy wondered if maybe someone was making him call her and he was speaking in code. She said the thing that stood out the most is that he didn't say I love you when he hung up. Apparently they'd made a deal early on in their relationship that they would end each phone call with I love you, but he just said gotta go. And she said he never said gotta go. This is what Wendy told the Fade to Black podcast when they interviewed her, which again was in 2023, more than a quarter century after he disappeared. In an interview with the LA Times that came out just a year after his disappearance, Wendy recounted the conversation as this. Gary, was that you trying to call me, sweetie? Wendy, who else would it be at 1 o'clock in the morning? Where are you? Gary, I'm past Barstow. He told her he wasn't tired, but assured her if he got tired, he'd pull off the road and sleep. He told her not to wait up for him and then said, see you later. The LA Times article doesn't mention him saying, I'm pumping pure adrenaline here, but presumably he did. Either way, he still isn't saying I love you when he hangs up. But perhaps the weirdest thing about this call is that there is absolutely no record of it. The last ping on Gary's cell phone came at 1:20 a.m. from a tower in the Mojave Desert near the Denny's. So his cell phone was on at the time Wendy said he called, but if he did call her at 1:15, it wasn't from his cell. I couldn't find anything confirming whether or not her phone records reflected this call, or even if her phone records were searched. But the last phone call on record from Gary's cell phone was at 12:38 a.m. And that's when he said he was going to stop for coffee.
Coffee, right?
Barstow is in between Los Angeles and Las Vegas, and this stretch of highway in the Mojave Desert is pretty barren. I mean, it's a desert. It's a remote area, but on this particular night, it was relatively busy with bikers and motorists heading to Las Vegas for the Tyson Holyfield fight. It's a little weird to me that there would be a lot of traffic at this time of night. It's like 1 a.m. But I don't know the fan base of boxing. I don't know how early they like to get there. Maybe people left Friday night after work, or they wanted to get in early and spend the day in Vegas just hanging out before the fight. I'm not sure. A few hours later, when Gary hadn't returned home at the time Wendy expected him, she grew even more concerned. That morning, she went outside. There was no sign that Gary had been there, and the weight of what was actually happening hadn't set in for her yet. She wasn't thinking, oh my God, he's missing. She's thinking, that little shit. I waited up all night for him and he's not even back yet. It wasn't until she spoke with a neighbor that morning about Gary not returning that it started to hit her, this isn't like him. Something's wrong.
Something's off.
Yeah. She began calling everyone she could think of. The police, hospitals along the route he'd been driving, Gary's friends. She tried to file a missing persons report, but the local police rejected her.
That fucking shit.
A man coming home a few hours late wasn't exactly a cause for alarm in their minds. Meanwhile, people started showing up at her house for the Tyson Holyfield fight. She'd been so overwhelmed with things that day that she hadn't called the party off. So now she's got all these house guests and has to explain to everyone that Gary is missing.
What a thing to happen.
I can't even imagine.
I would just turn people away. I'd be like, go, I'm so sorry. My life is in a crisis right now.
My thinking is it probably was a comfort that they were all there.
Oh, good. Well, then I guess she had a support system.
They're all friends of his and friends of hers.
Sure.
And so I think being surrounded by them probably helped. It just seemed preposterous to everyone there that Gary would be missing. Because if you remember back from part 1, he was the rugged type who could hold his own.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we all know people like that where you just don't worry about them because you're like, oh, they can take care of themselves. So at first, his friends were like, no, Gary's not missing. He probably just went off somewhere to write, which would be plausible. But Wendy insisted they were always in contact. If he was going to stop somewhere to write for a few hours, he would have called her. Mm-hmm. Plus, they were still in their honeymoon phase. The idea of him simply ignoring her calls felt out of the question. Wendy called the police station again later that Saturday saying, hey, I still haven't heard from my husband. So they said, okay, we'll come by your home to take your statement. While waiting on officers from the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Department to show up, people were growing more concerned. So someone said, why don't we just turn on the fight? That'll be better than all of us sitting here twiddling our thumbs. Maybe it'll help take our mind off things. They just wanted a distraction. Mm-hmm. The officers showed up at 7 p.m. and they see all these people there watching the fight on TV. And they're like, what the fuck? There's a party going on? They took Wendy's statement. She filed the missing persons report and offered a $10,000 reward for information leading to Gary. But officers noted in their report the following. The Santa Barbara Sheriff's Department advises that Oates DeVore, that's Wendy, had a Tyson Holyfield party on 6/28/97 at her residence. She did not appear to certain witnesses to be grieving in any way. She talked about how she was going to spend DeVore's money, and she was coming on to certain men in attendance.
What? I don't buy it.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Who got that information? Like, who said that?
This is the police.
Yeah. He just went missing. Like, and she's already scared. She's trying to take her mind off shit. You know, I understand where people criticize or scrutinize people's responses to situations like this, of course. But at the same time, this just happened. She's probably reeling.
She's probably like, what is going on?
Right.
Her house is a circus right now.
Yeah.
I don't even know how she was able to form sentences.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, she's already going through it.
Yeah. Bad police. Bad.
I mean, rather than being helpful, they just kind of start accusing her.
They're just like, well, look at what you're doing.
Yeah. David Devon, one of Gary's oldest and closest friends, was at the house when the police were there, and he said they were just grilling Wendy like she was a suspect. He said it was making even him uncomfortable. The officers were quick to form the theory that Wendy was having an affair with one of the guests at the house. I think literally because they had seen her talking with him. And that the two had conspired to murder Gary. They were like, oh my God, she's talking to a man. Clearly she's sleeping with him, and they murdered Gary.
What the fuck?
Yeah.
This is that type of shit where they're like, oh, we know what's going on here. We've seen it a million times.
It's like they just kind of formed a conclusion without any information.
That is the worst police work, and that is what gets a lot of people in trouble.
Yeah.
Because the police formulate a theory, and then they can't see past that theory, and then they force that narrative, and then they force innocence, they force confession.
Mm-hmm. They even interviewed this particular man, separate from everyone else, because I guess they thought they could get something incriminating out of him. It's a big leap from here's a woman reporting her husband missing to she's having an affair and the two of them work together to have him killed. Wendy was not having an affair, to be clear, and the sheriff's department claims that Wendy was never actually a suspect. But she sure was put through the ringer, especially that first day. Between the police, the house guests, the phone ringing off the hook with people wanting to know what was going on, by the time police left Wendy's that Saturday evening, the media had already picked up the story. And in the midst of all this, Wendy was calling people to ask if they'd heard from Gary. One person she reached out to was Claudia Christian, Gary's third wife, yes. The women didn't know each other, but I think at that point, Wendy was just trying anything and everything. She might have asked Claudia if this had ever happened while she was married to him. Like, did he ever just disappear when you two were together? Or I'm sure she asked if he had any idea where he might have gone. Like, is there a place that he would sometimes go to? But Claudia hadn't heard from him. She did, however, offer to help. On a movie she had worked on, she met a military advisor who worked in special forces. So she called him and was like, hey, what can we do? Like, how can we find this guy? He told her they could hire a helicopter. He was like, I've got guys. We've got search and rescue equipment. We can look for him. So that's a pretty great contact to have. And Wendy was like, that's wonderful. Thank you. Another person Wendy had called that morning was John Irvin, the director I mentioned earlier that did Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. She left a message, but she didn't hear back from him. That is, until he just showed up at her house that evening. But he wouldn't come inside. When she answered the door, he immediately asked her to get in the car. He was like, just get in the car. We're going to go for a drive. She's like, what the fuck? He hadn't wanted to talk on the phone, which is why he just showed up at her house. So she gets in the car and he drives her up into the mountains overlooking Santa Barbara until they were no longer in an area where they could get cell service. It sounds sinister.
What the hell?
So up there, away from everyone and everything, he tells her, this is no ordinary case of someone going missing, and I want you to know that. He said, I can't protect you. I can't help you because I'm going to be gone for the next year and a half. I think he was doing a movie and he was going to be out of the country. But he said, I'm going to get someone for you that will take care of you. He's high up in government. He comes from the Reagan administration. He's going to call you. His name is Frank Thorwald. And shortly after John dropped Wendy off back at her house, Frank Thorwald called. Thorwald served as a senior advisor to both President Reagan and President Bush, as well as a senior advisor to 2 attorneys general. He held a lot of other positions in government as well, far too many to list. But most important to note is that while serving in government, he held a top secret SCI security clearance. SCI stands for Sensitive Compartmented Information. That is the highest level of security clearance there is in the United States.
Whoa.
Granted, by the time the 90s rolled around, he didn't have that level of clearance, but he was still very well connected.
Okay.
Thorwald traveled to Los Angeles from wherever he was. It might have been DC. It might have been Arizona. I'm not sure. But he wasn't in California. He got a hotel room, called Wendy up and said, okay, I'm here for you now.
What is happening?
That's what she's asking. She's like, what the hell is happening here?
God.
So she files the missing persons report. Police act as though she's been cheating on Gary and conspired to murder him. She contacts his ex-wife, who she doesn't even know, who tells her she's got this military guy who's going to get a helicopter and some guys to do a search. Director John Irvin takes her to a secluded area in the mountains where there's not a soul in sight to tell her something fishy's going on. And she gets a call from a guy with super secret ties to the government who says, I'm here in LA, I'm going to look after you. And the media has pounced on the story. And this is just day 1. A few friends spent the night at Wendy's that evening, and it seemed like the phone never stopped ringing. Reporters were calling, trying to get information. Studios were calling, offering their support because a lot of them knew Gary. And RKO Pictures, the studio Gary was working with on The Big Steal, called as well, but not to offer support. They just wanted to know if Gary had left behind a copy of the screenplay.
Yeah.
Either on his home computer or maybe he'd stashed a hard copy somewhere, because the studio's financing depended on them getting this screenplay. I wonder who at that studio was tasked with calling this distraught wife to be like, hey, sucks about your man, but could you just look around, see if you see a script lying around?
Oh, I don't like that.
Wendy and those that stayed with her that weekend put together a missing poster that had a photo of Gary, a close-up of his right hand with that pinky jutting out to the side, and the reward offer of $10,000. Gary's friend David, along with another writer, Phil Combest, who is actually the guy police thought Wendy was having an affair with, they could tell the police were suspicious of Wendy, and they didn't feel like the sheriff's department was going to be much help in finding Gary, so they decided to look for him themselves. They contacted a professional tracker with a bloodhound who agreed to meet them in the Mojave Desert near that Denny's and help with the search. They brought along some personal items of Gary's, the band from inside one of his cowboy hats that would like have his sweat on it, a sneaker he wore when he went jogging, so definitely smelled. And they drove out to the area where Wendy had last heard from him, near that Denny's. Right away, things were weird because as they turned off the freeway, they saw a telephone pole. And at the top of the telephone pole was an arrow, like a road sign arrow, pointing to the left. Underneath the arrow was a piece of wood, and spray painted on the wood was the name Gary. And that's all that was on the sign. When I read this, the first thing I did was look up to see if there's a Gary, California, because maybe this was some weird hand-painted directional sign, like Gary, California to the left. There is a Gary, California, but it's spelled G-A-R-E-Y, not G-A-R-Y. The sign read G-A-R-Y. And the community of Gary, California is nowhere near where this telephone pole was. So it was a little weird. That's one of those things where if you're a spiritual person, you're going to be like, what does it mean?
Right. That is really strange.
The search party followed the direction of the sign because you have to, right? There was a trail leading away from it that went about 100 yards and ended at a small brick hut that was in ruins. And the bloodhound did not pick up Gary's scent. That info about the hut in ruins is from the Fade to Black podcast. However, on a website called Covert Action Magazine, there's a huge article about Gary's case. It came out the same year as that podcast, and Wendy gave interviews to both. In the Covert Action Magazine article, Wendy states she was with the men during this search, that she saw the telephone pole and went to that hut, which she describes as a cabin. She said it was like a one-room storage shed full of weapons and said that she informed the police, but they never followed up on it. I don't know why there are two separate accounts, but in the Fade to Black podcast, it's clear it was just David and Phil with the bloodhound and the tracker. Wendy was back at the house tending to things there. I'm not saying Wendy is lying. I don't think she is, to be clear. But I think what might be happening is over time, she's remembering things a little differently. She's in her 70s now. I think when so much time has passed, it's easy for details to get warped. From what I can find, Wendy stayed home that Sunday with some other friends that had come over and stayed the night, while David and Phil went to the Mojave Desert. Wendy's roommate from college, Gene, had come in from Austin, Texas to support Wendy and just kind of like be there for whatever she needed. It was kind of chaotic because all throughout that day, reporters were coming by trying to get the story. The phone was ringing like crazy. It was a circus. Jean put her suitcase in Gary's office just to keep it out of the way because there was a lot going on. And towards the end of the day, things are starting to wind down. The reporters have cleared. Wendy's friends are helping her look for pictures and home videos that might aid in the investigation. And then there was a knock at the door. Two men dressed in suits and flashing government IDs stood in the doorway, but only one of them spoke. He looked a little familiar to Wendy, but she couldn't quite place him. And she's like, I'm sorry, I think we've met. You look familiar. And he said, oh, yes, I've been to a party here before. I'm a close friend of Gary's. My name is Chase Brandon.
Chase Brandon, CIA.
She invites the men inside, and she said Chase was very emotional. And he asked her, would you mind if I just spent a few moments alone in Gary's office to collect myself?
No.
Wendy's like, yeah, okay, whatever. No. So he goes in and shuts the door while the other guy waits in the living room. Meanwhile, Jean, the college roommate, needed something out of her suitcase. So she walks down the hall to Gary's office and opens the door and sees this guy in there. She had no idea who he was because she hadn't been in the room when he came into the house talking to Wendy. To her, he was just some guy, probably a friend of Gary's, but she thought it was weird that he was bent over Gary's desk looking at Gary's computer. When he noticed her come in, he had a look of surprise on his face. According to Jean, he didn't seem like he'd been emotional at all. He definitely didn't seem like someone on the verge of tears who needed a few moments in Gary's office to collect himself. He just seemed surprised that someone had walked in. Jean got what she needed from her suitcase and left the room, and shortly after Chase Brandon came out of the office, he told Wendy he'd stay in touch, and he left. She thought it was weird because Chase had mentioned to her he was in the public affairs division of the CIA, so she's like, well, if he's CIA, why didn't he offer to help find Gary? He just came in, acted all sad, went into Gary's office, and then left. Later that evening, David and Phil returned from their search in the desert. And Wendy mentioned the weird encounter with Chase Brandon, who acted all emotional over Gary's disappearance. This caught Jean's attention. She was like, I saw that guy bent over Gary's computer, and he didn't look sad to me. Wendy's like, what the fuck? She walks down the hall to Gary's office, goes over to his computer, and it had been turned on, and it was frozen. According to Wendy, on the screen was a pop-up that read, "Are you sure you want to delete the big steal?" Now, I don't know. To me, that sounds a little too bad spy movie to be what was actually on the computer screen.
I'm not buying that.
It feels a little...
It's too on the nose.
Yes. But regardless, the computer was unusable. She couldn't get into it. It had crashed. So she thinks, I'll call former top secret SCI clearance guy, Frank Thorwald. He'll know what to do.
I like to think that, the name escapes me. Who was just in his office? The CIA
Chase
guy?
Brandon.
Chase Brandon, sorry. I like to think Chase Brandon was looking at some weird porn and it like crashed the computer and he's like, oh, gotta go. And like ran out of there.
That's so interesting that you mentioned porn and you're about to find out why. Thorwald tried everything to recover Gary's data, but even he couldn't get into the computer. And the fact that Chase had shown up at all and spent time in Gary's office really bothered Thorwald. And that was just day 2.
This is the second day.
This is the second day. Busy weekend.
This was like over 2 months.
No. Thorwald called Chase to try and see if they could somehow work together to find out what happened to Gary, which seems logical. Let's try to work together here. Since Thorwald didn't have the security clearances he did in the 80s, and with Chase's position in the CIA, he thought maybe Chase could help where he could not. Thorwald did not believe Chase or the CIA made Gary disappear, but he wondered if maybe in the time Gary and Chase worked together on research for the big steal, if Chase had introduced someone into Gary's life that might cause Gary harm. But when Thorwald called Chase, rather than offering any help to look for his supposed friend, Chase and Gary had been friends for 16 years at this point, remember. Chase just blew him off and sent him to a porn website. Just as a fuck you.
What the fuck?
Yeah. A little background with that. So Thorwald and I think it was Ed Meese. Ed Meese worked in the Reagan administration and was very anti-porn. And so that was kind of like Chase's way of being like, fuck you guys.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't like this Chase guy.
When David and Phil's search in the desert didn't turn up anything, they rented a small plane and flew along Highway 14, which, based on his stops en route, is the highway he would have been driving. It's a long road that goes over the California aqueduct. They were looking for any sign of him or his white Ford Explorer, but they didn't see anything.
How far is where he was living with Wendy from the Denny's?
About 3 hours-ish.
Okay.
3.5 probably. When none other than Arnold Schwarzenegger heard Gary was missing, remember he started
did that movie.
Yeah, Raw Deal. He told Wendy, I want to help you out. I want to help you out. That was by Arnold. Maybe I'll cut it.
Oh, good. That was mine.
Okay. You have no room to make fun of mine.
Oh.
It sounds like a whole other creature is inside of you.
That's how I feel every day.
Oh. Arnold believed Gary had been carjacked. He had that new fancy Eddie Bauer edition Ford Explorer. So he hired detectives to search down in Mexico at various chop shops thinking the car had been stolen and stripped for parts. Then Jean-Claude Van Damme was like, I want to help too. Gary had been a script doctor on Time Cop and Sudden Death, both of which starred Jean-Claude Van Damme. Van Damme and Schwarzenegger were rivals, 2 action stars competing at the box office. So when Van Damme was like, oh, Schwarzenegger hired detectives to go to Mexico, I'll top that. I'll go to Mexico myself and look for this car.
Guys, this is a real person who went missing. This is not a time to be trying to one-up each other.
But they both truly, genuinely felt that something was with the car. Meanwhile, with all the media attention the case was getting and the fact that Gary disappeared on a drive through multiple states, which adds a whole other layer to investigations, the FBI got involved. So with a visit from the CIA, the FBI's involvement, the world's biggest action stars launching their own investigation, and former top secret clearance guy Frank Thorwald's assistance based on John Irvin's cryptic conversation with her in the mountains, Wendy's starting to wonder, who the fuck did I marry? Multiple agencies were looking for Gary, searching that stretch of Highway 14 around the aqueduct, trying to find any piece of evidence they could. 3 weeks after Gary went missing, America's Most Wanted ran a segment on the case. Around this same time, a package arrived in the mail for Wendy from Santa Fe. She was scared to open it, so she had the police do it. She was like, I don't know what this is. Is this some kind of bomb or something? It wasn't. Inside the box was a vase, purchased by Gary. But before you get excited, it was purchased before he disappeared.
Damn.
Gary had apparently bought Wendy a matching set of vases while he was in New Mexico. He wanted to get her two, but the store only had one in stock. So he took the one with him and the other was shipped to her.
He ordered it.
You know that had to have messed with her head. Like, here's a present that arrives from Santa Fe. It's from Gary. Like, this poor woman, I can't even begin to fathom. So many people came into Wendy's life in the days and weeks following Gary's disappearance. Kevin, get ready. It's your guy. One of these people was Playgirl model turned publicist turned cheesecake entrepreneur turned self-proclaimed CIA operative, Michael Sands.
Michael Sands.
No one really knows where Sands came from or why he got involved in the case. Not even Wendy. It's like he materialized out of thin air. Sands is definitely eccentric. He started out as an actor or model. As a publicist, he represented Ronald Reagan's son, Michael Reagan, actress Christy Swanson, and Kevin Federline. He reportedly was the promoter for Mr. Blackwell's Worst Dress List. Supposedly, it was his idea for Mr. Blackwell to host a breakfast for the press at his mansion where he would announce the worst dressed women in Hollywood.
Also, chunky Kevin Federline is so fucking hot to me. I know he went on those weight loss shows, but I was like, honey, don't.
I
have nothing to say. I have a lot to say.
I think you have a lot to say.
That I'm not going to.
Okay. Mr. Blackwell, whose actual name is Richard Seltzer, he is dubbed the original red carpet bitch. He was the one who started the whole, like, what's she wearing kind of thing on the red carpet.
Oh, he's that cunt.
His main thing was there was this program, this one particular Sunday, it was like the second Sunday in January every year, where he would invite all the press to his mansion, which happened to be in Hancock Park, which is actually where Nat King Cole's place was.
That's where it was.
Mr. Blackwell, we'll call him, would come down this grand staircase and say, oh, hello. And then, give his list of the worst dressed women in Hollywood. He also had a best dressed, but none of the press cared about that. So that was one of Michael Sands' claims to fame, is that he helped promote Mr. Blackwell's worst dressed list. Sands also sold designer cheesecakes based on his own recipes at various grocery stores.
Designer cheesecakes, honey. There's only a few. Tell me all about them.
Well, we don't have any of the recipes, but I'm sure they were maybe good.
Delicious. I had a cheesecake once that was lemon and ricotta.
I love cheesecake. Matt does not.
What?
It's really sad, actually.
Kate, if you ever need to go out for cheesecakes,
I might.
Do you like the Cheesecake Factory?
I haven't been in a really long time, but I always did.
We should go to the Cheesecake Factory.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Michael Sands also supposedly assisted the CIA in capturing terrorist Abu Abbas by arranging for Abbas to be interviewed under the guise of a book and movie deal. Then when Abbas did the interview, Sands gave it, along with Abbas's contact details, to the FBI and CIA. And that's actually also documented in Trisha Jenkins' book, The CIA in Hollywood. Sounds fucking wild, but also completely on brand for someone living in Hollywood. Sure. None of it surprises me. I'm sure I made friends with multiple people who posed nude, worked for some secret government agency, and just never knew about it. It's what all those characters on Hollywood Boulevard are actually doing.
Oh.
Like the Elmo
They're
and the
operatives.
Superman. Yeah. All
We
undercover.
figured it out.
There it is.
Kate, be careful. We don't want to go missing.
No. Well, I mean, I moved away from there, so.
Yes.
Wendy believes Michael Sands was introduced to her through a mutual friend. He just kind of showed up and inserted himself into the investigation. He took over all the PR and gave himself the role of Wendy's spokesperson, which actually she welcomed because she had enough on her plate.
Yeah, I'm sure she's tired of talking to people. She's like, leave me the fuck alone.
Yeah, so he kind of became the face and be the one that would speak to these reporters.
He's like, hello, reporters. Here's a slice of my new cheesecake. Enjoy it. And also, look at these old pictures of me naked.
That is exactly what he did.
Wait, what was his name again? Michael Sands?
Michael Sands. Don't look up too much about him because it's going to spoil something for part 3.
I'm only going to look at pictures.
Okay. Despite the media attention and work of multiple law enforcement agencies, as well as the California Department of Transportation, they still didn't have any leads. There hadn't been any activity on Gary's cell phone or credit cards, and while they suspected that foul play could be a factor here, there wasn't any proof. Wendy increased the reward from $10,000 to $100,000.
Whoa! That's a lot of money.
A lot of money. Meanwhile, multiple psychics start showing up at Wendy's house.
No.
A lot of them were actually sent by TV shows. Even America's Most Wanted wanted her to talk to a psychic. And they all had various claims and theories.
Of course they did.
Gary's alive somewhere. Gary's been kidnapped. Gary's dead. I don't know how Wendy didn't lose her mind.
Can we leave her alone?
Please leave this woman alone.
Can we just leave her the fuck alone?
Or actually just like help find him?
Or do something that's not in the public eye.
For the first few weeks after his disappearance, Wendy and Gary's ex, Claudia Christian, had become somewhat friends. Claudia was there to help in any way that she could. But just as quickly as Gary's story dominated the airwaves, a new headline took over. On August 31st, 1997, about 2 months after Gary went missing, Princess Diana, Dodi Fayed, and their driver Henri Paul died in a car accident. If you remember from part 1, Claudia and Dodi had dated pretty seriously and had remained friends throughout the years. And about a year before Gary's disappearance, Claudia and Dodi had reunited. Claudia was a regular on the TV series Babylon 5, and while she was on hiatus, the producers wanted to send her to London to do some press. So she calls up Dodi and she's like, hey, I'm coming to town. And he said, great, you could stay with me. And things started up again between them. Then Dodi asked Claudia if she would have his baby. They both really wanted kids, but Claudia couldn't stand the thought of her child living the life that Dodi lived. She didn't like that life. It's why things hadn't worked out between them in the first place. And rather than talking things out and discussing her concerns with him, she kind of Sex and the City burgered him and just wrote him a note, basically turning him down. And then she left the apartment.
Claudia. I know a Claudia in my life that had wrote a note to break up with someone. A tale as old as time.
They never spoke again, despite having been friends for 20 years.
I don't love that.
It sucks. And she always regretted it. A year later, she's dealing with the disappearance of her ex-husband when she hears her ex-boyfriend/friend has been killed. So she kind of dropped out of Wendy's life after that. Emotionally, she was wrecked. She was dealing with all that.
Was Dodi dating Princess Diana when they were in that crash?
Yes.
I need to go back and look at all of that because I was a kid when that happened.
Mm-hmm.
And all I cared about when the news came on was that the Spice Girls were performing on Saturday Night Live.
Oh.
And it was the same night that happened.
Oh.
So I was upset
For different reasons. You were what, like 12?
12, yeah.
Yeah. As the weeks turned into months, with no new information from law enforcement and no word from Gary, Wendy hired private investigator Don Crutchfield to help with the case. She's like, well, law enforcement hasn't done anything. Let's get the PIs in here. Michael Sands and Don Crutchfield went together to retrace Gary's steps along the route he had taken. They stopped at gas stations, truck stops. They posted flyers about Gary. They talked with people along the way to see if anyone remembered seeing him. And people claimed they saw him in a tobacco shop playing backgammon. They saw his truck in a parking lot. They saw him wandering down the street carrying a water bottle. But none of these people were able to confirm that the man they believed to be Gary had that deformity on his right hand.
The pinky.
The pinky. Then, out of the blue, in the fall of 1997, Chase Brandon calls Wendy. She hadn't heard from him since he stopped by that day to go into Gary's office. So it's been a few months. She's thinking, oh my God, he's found something. He's got info that can help. But no, that's not why he was calling. He was like, hey, do you want to come to Washington, D.C. for the 50th anniversary of the CIA? And she was like, what?
Why? This Chase Brandon character is just that.
A character.
A character.
Chase said, yeah, it'll be great. You'll get to meet former President Bush. There's going to be a lot of interesting people there. And she was like, I mean, I don't have anywhere to stay. Also, I'm kind of going through this whole thing of my husband missing, you know, your friend of 15 plus years. So I'm kind of busy with that. And Chase said, oh, don't worry about a place to stay. You can stay with me. Wendy was understandably taken aback. And she was like, are you hitting on me?
Yeah.
He just kept pushing it. This whole 50th anniversary invitation. He's like, you should come. It'll be great. And she said, I really wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. And that was pretty much the end of the phone call. Of course, it didn't sit well with Wendy. Why isn't this guy helping her find her husband? Months went by. Then Michael Sands, who had more or less been the face of the case to the media, went rogue and gave an interview without Wendy to a small newspaper called the Modesto Bee, where he claimed that Gary used the help of the CIA to stage his own disappearance as a publicity stunt for the big steal. What?
Why would he say that?
Exactly. He just comes up with that.
That doesn't make sense to me. Also, that's dangerous. Like,
yeah.
In an ongoing investigation, you can't just put shit out like that.
Maybe stick to cheesecakes. On the 1-year anniversary of Gary's disappearance, the LA Times ran an article titled Without a Trace. They interviewed Wendy as well as several of Gary's friends and talked about the investigation, all the roads that had led to nowhere. And at the end of the article, they interviewed Chase Brandon. And this is what he says, quote, Gary was very happy. He had reached a point where he was about to direct a movie. He was excited about that. The guy had the world by the coattails. His disappearance and probable death is just a horrible, horrible thing to come to terms with. But I think in my own sense of what logically happened to Gary is that he was driving this new high-profile, flashy Ford Explorer with all the package options on it, and that is a vehicle that law enforcement people will tell you is a highly sought-after car for carjackers. My sense was Gary was one of those people who met a horrible, tragic quirk of fate. He was simply victimized by people who wanted that car.
That's specific.
And a bold statement. This infuriated Wendy. First off, she didn't even know that Chase was being interviewed by the same article that she was. And then for him to just come out and say, yeah, he's probably dead. Like, what? We don't have evidence
There's
of that.
There's no evidence of that.
Here's this guy, friends, quote unquote, with Gary, works for the CIA, who she thought out of anyone should be able to help in the search. But he has done nothing. The media had drastically died down since the beginning of the case, obviously. People just weren't talking about it anymore. So Wendy ramps things up a bit. She does a round of media interviews. She went on CBS This Morning, The Today Show, and Good Morning America all in one day. And on all these shows, they all ask Wendy, well, have you thought that maybe Gary is dead? Wendy had it. And on one of the programs, she kind of blows up and she says, if my husband is dead, then show me a body.
Fair enough.
1 week later.
No.
On July 8th, 1998, at 10:30 in the morning, her phone rings. She can't remember who it was that called. Everything was kind of a blur. But the voice on the other end of the line said, turn on the news. When she did, she watched on TV as a crew pulled Gary's white Eddie Bauer edition Ford Explorer out of the California aqueduct just off Highway 14.
Oh, shit.
And that's where we're going to end part 2.
Damn. I was going to say, did they ever find the car? That was my next question. They did.
They did.
Oh, my God. What is happening?
It's wild, right?
This is insane. Damn.
Van Damme.
Jean-Claude, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Michael Sands, Chase Brandon.
So we're just going to name all of the people we met in this episode. So we're going to end it there for this week. We will get to part 3, which will be the conclusion of the case of the missing Gary DeVore next week. And if you have any thoughts thus far, don't look anything up, don't ruin it for yourselves, then you can leave us a comment.
Yeah, wait for Kate to tell you.
That sounds like an order. That sounds like
an
so
order.
demanding.
You take that inner, like, I want to know what happened, and channel it into something else, and then come join us next Monday.
I thought you were going to say next month, which actually technically it will be.
It will be next month.
Wowzers.
Ooh, why is it March already?
Hey. I know that like multi-parters are not everyone's favorite because it just kind of drags on. But now I know why that podcast had to do 8 episodes for this, because there's just so much. There's just so much.
Yeah.
So anyway, let us know your thoughts in the comments on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, or Spotify at
Horrorwood Podcast.
Or you can send us an email at
horrorwoodpodcast@gmail.com.
And while you're sending us an email, send us your own stories, your own spooky stories, your brushes with crime, whatever they might be, because we want more stories for our little Misfit Monday tales. So send them our way.
Send us little notes. Little stories about your life.
And if you have a little extra pocket change, you can send us that too on Patreon at
patreon.com/horrorwoodpodcast. There's fun stuff over there, people.
There
We're
is
doing
fun
the
stuff.
Crime Couch,
Couch.
which you'll see extra post-show things with me and Kate
Chatting away.
We just can't stop talking to each other.
Can't stop, won't stop. Ooh. Until we have to sneeze or take a drink.
Yes, or burp.
Or clear our throats. Okay, don't do murder. That's all. Bye.
Bye.